if you haven't caught the play on words in the title, Leaning Out of Six Sigma, the person that I worked for during the majority of that time period was a woman by the name of Barbara Wheat. And Barb and a couple of her colleagues from back in Allied Signal Six Sigma days had wrote a book called Leaning into Six Sigma. And that was a very book based on what we probably all know, right? We should, utilize lean basics and so forth when you're doing Six Sigma. It kind of still gave birth to the Lean Six Sigma movement. But in the course of working for Barb and at Tenneco over that period of time, what ended up happening was literally like a reverse. Yes, that got us into it, but then Six Sigma in its own weird way also got us out of it. And there's a couple of primers and things that occurred to make that happen. So to prime that, for me, and it doesn't make my opinion correct, but for me there's two ends of the spectrum when we talk about operational excellence, Lean Six Sigma, whatever. And that one side we have situations where we have trained experts working continuous improvement projects with savings goals and toll gate reviews, right? Very hierarchical command and control style of Six Sigma. Or, and we probably heard a little bit of this week, I actually hope, right? Servant leadership, teaching everybody how to see and solve problems everywhere, every day. Now, the one on the right feels a little idealistic, and that's okay. I think it should be. But at some point or another, most companies are somewhere on a sliding scale in between these two. And Tenneco, the company I worked for at the time, was no different. So a typical company does what? When I say typical, I hope this is actually becoming atypical. But unfortunately, this is probably still a majority. They tend to focus on short-term results. They like to fix problems with money. We have problems, and what happens? Oh, we'll come up with a recommendation, and somebody wants to purchase a new software. Well, what's the ROI on that, right? It's very easy for a senior leader to say, well, I need a definite solution. Well, tell me what I have to do. There's an investment and a cost and a savings. I like that. That's a nice line item, right? It's done. It's carried out. All I need you to do is execute that plan. Okay, that's typical. We also have lots of leadership waste in a typical company. Leaders spend way too much time in meetings. They spend too much time in bureaucracy, probably way too much time reviewing charters and ROIs. And again, all this, they have a bias towards action plans instead of actual general problem solving. So what happened? Or let's say that project focus is attractive, right? What can you do? Well, I can break it into steps. Why was Six Sigma deployment companies so successful? Because I can come in. I have the roadmap. I have the deployment. Here it is. Here's a list of items. In fact, it's probably an itemized charges for you as well. We're going to train some champions in your senior management team. We're going to help you start to identify projects, do charters, and find the money, train your cadre of black belts. We'll go out and execute those projects, and by God, you'll pocket all the money. What happens is we end up with potential bottlenecking of process improvement. It becomes about cost cutting instead of good, healthy cost reduction. It becomes a little elitist. And that didn't happen everywhere that Six Sigma was probably deployed, but it definitely can happen. And unfortunately, it results in the batching of continuous improvement. Instead of it happening a lot everywhere, every day, what do? We put a lot of resources into these projects, so it kind of gets batched around big issues. And a lot of the little issues go unresolved. So, what should we do? Does that mean that if you're in that situation, or you feel like you're in that situation, should you give up? Well, I'm hoping that this, in terms of a case study, will convince you, no, right? It's okay. Consider yourself in a long game. Have some resilience, and think about it a different way. So you have, at this point, hopefully a bunch of black belts, green belts within a company. My suggestion is start to think of using that human capital and capacity within the organization in a different way. Utilize them to become your next generation of servant leaders. Instead of just giving them more training on the next logistical regression analysis or next control charts, right? Instead, get them into leadership training. Send them out. Make them do positions in which they do have to actually serve as a leader of a small team to humble themselves. Eventually, the good ones should get promoted, right? Or get opportunities throughout the company. Eventually, what will happen is they'll have their own teams. Eventually, they'll run ops. They'll run quality. Eventually, they'll run IT. And eventually, you'll have a critical mass in the organization that believes in the principles that allow you to get to that other side of the sliding scale. So here's a little history. Tenneco, company I worked for, I joined in 2000, fresh out of college. The company had just undergone a split from our parent corporation, and we had about 20,000 employees at the time, and our stock price literally dumped to like 86 cents. As you can see over the course of the time period, 2000 to 2003 was pretty much this is an adjusted stock to close. That's a time period of our Six Sigma program. Lots of cost savings projects, $40 million of savings a year, right, rolling up into this company. 2005, right, we're kind of getting our feet under ourselves, but another special thing happens in 2005 that strangely has another connection to this conference. So everyone, if you were at the main presentation and you saw the Toyota presentation with Ruhman Miller, the gentleman in that video, Jamie Bonini, happened to be our advisor after we got some business with Toyota in 2005. So a lot of what you saw occur at Ruhman Miller, similar things started occurring in Tenneco, and we had a lot of weight and leverage from Toyota to help convince management, hey, maybe we should make some changes. Hey, instead of pocketing these cost savings, maybe we should reinvest in adding some team leads. Well, who will train these team leads? Well, that's a good question. Why don't we actually have some of these guys that you've been training for forever have all these skill sets? Maybe they should fill in as a team lead for a while. Maybe they should actually serve in that role. Maybe we should ship a couple people from another plant that have a lot of potential to go work with them for 6 months. Long-term commitments for an hourly position. But we came to realize with that, right, that is probably the most important position in the company. The most important people, the people that are actually directly fulfilling the value and the need of the client every day, most of the time have no leadership, have no direct coach available to them. If you've got supervisors that have 20 people reporting to them or 40 people reporting to them, ask yourself if you're serious about the development of your hourly employees or whoever that is, whether they're salaried or they're hourly. They're the first connection to the client. So what service are you providing them? What development? But 2005, Toyota starts to make these changes or convince us to make these changes within Tenneco. And the good thing is it came at the right time. We had this critical mass. We were training at any one time, probably had 125 to 150 certified black belts, full-time role in a company of about 20,000. Those ranks literally started to become production managers, quality managers, global supply chain leaders. So by the time we got to this point, we started asking these questions. A lot of these guys were like, oh yeah, I thought we should kind of move this direction for a long time. So it wasn't too hard of a sell. And in that sense, this is what kind of enabled us to get to a point that otherwise we may have never done. And eventually, by the time I had left, and I like to hope and think the culture is still the same there, we had a real culture in which our leadership was expected to be a teacher. We had plant managers who didn't go out of their way to avoid walking down the aisleways or avoid talking to people. We had plant managers who might literally almost know the names of all 400 employees. We had people excited to work at the plants. We had plants getting 30 and 40% improvement on their metrics year over year over year. Where you think you can't find another 30%, there's always another. So over the course of this entire time period, stock price is one thing, but that company revenue increased 200+%, earnings per share went up 800+%, stock valuation 600+%, cash flow 246%, and the debt that we were straddled with after the split reduced by 92%. It's, for me, the success story and literally the story of my training and development myself as a leader, and I credit this with it, and I didn't realize what was going on at the time. 2005, I was a diehard master black belt. By God. When they said reformed or, that's a medical condition, I probably believe that now. But at the time, I was in it. I was diehard, live, breathe, die. This amount of time, both with Toyota's influence and as well as just, those realizations when you're going to a plant and you realize that you're there. You've been flown across the country to solve a problem, and literally within 30 minutes out on the plant floor, you realize that the employees know how to solve it all along. No one's listening to them, or no one's providing them the extra little effort that could have helped them get to their own solution. Situations like that were enough to prime me and the other group and the other individuals in that group to accept what Toyota was suggesting and telling us, and enough of us had moved into operations leadership roles that we were able to make those changes. Now, of course, everybody knows about that dip, but 2008 crash affected everything. Sorry, you don't want to look at me. But in essence, the crux of that entire story, what I'm hoping to convey, isn't that it's some magic, but that if you are thinking, I want to get to that kind of culture that we heard several different companies talk about, servant leaders, right? Surface problems, innovation, Kaizen, right? The faster learning cycles. How do we get there? Well, it's way over here a lot of times as an ideal that we all wish we could get to. It doesn't matter. Some point along the line, we're a sliding scale. We didn't start out with this and grow it organically, and you're stuck over here somewhere in between. Utilize what you have. Utilize the critical mass of people that they're letting you train, or that you already have access to, or that you already have leverage with. Find those allies in those groups and prep the company, right? Prep the company, and even if they don't know what's happening, for that kind of a transformation, and if and when it's ready. So I'm actually probably going to be relatively short. That's essentially the end of it, and I'd like actually more questions or conversations if you guys have any.
So you had the belts that were trained to use tools.
Yes.
And bring solutions, and now they're managers of an area. And what was that transformation like to get away from tools and really rely on what they see and understanding of the problem, to then ask the right questions to lead the team to solutions, as opposed to them being the glory, the ones that bring the glory?
Yes. It was probably a little bit of foresight by my manager at the time. Barb had actually, when she joined around 2003, we literally kind of did a revamp. It's great, right? We did the typical Six Sigma training, and then we went into overload on leadership development, servant leadership principles. I have no idea how many John Maxwell books that were purchased in that company, but it was like we tried to engulf everybody in a opposite way of thinking as much as possible. And that we had our own internal annual symposiums every year that we managed to get through, had everybody, all these black belts globally across the country together for a week so that we could inundate them with these things. The Master Black Belt group was all being inundated by Barb. Therefore were doing that with their black belts. So I told somebody else earlier today that it was a little bit like a quiet insurrection. And that we did our best to change the mindset of anyone that was essentially willing to listen and willing to participate, and eventually we got enough of those minds changed. So to your answer, was that perfect, and did they ever always do that correctly or not? No. I mean, nothing ever is. But definitely the mindsets by that point of our typical black belts were already ready to lead and to do those sorts of activities. That we still, even to this day, they maintain a centralized group, but it's no longer a Lean Six Sigma group. It's a technical global production system, and their job is to do what? Their job is very much like TSSC's. It's to propagate that system and those principles throughout the company with vendors, suppliers, and that's what they do. And they had dropped the typical Lean and Six Sigma absolute monikers. Some stuff is resilient, right? At this point, it's kind of Kaizen is Kaizen. If you've been using that word for a while, it's kind of senseless to change it. But it kind of morphed. We already had the Lean camps and the Six Sigma camps in the company even way back when, and they fought. Eventually, it all went away, brought those two camps together, and then literally got it out of the hands of experts. So.
Do you believe, though, that you have to go through that journey to some extent?
I think it's going to find that it's more common, especially in our typical Western publicly traded companies. I don't think you have to, but I do think it's probably more common than not, simply also because so many companies started into the Six Sigma route. And I think somebody else's point, right? It was either how many years did it last? Well, there was a reason we had a new leader brought in around 2003. We were about 3 years in. Stuff was starting to get a little stale. People were starting to wonder where that next set of cost savings was going to come from. There was a primer and a reason for that, and a lot of companies do get to that point and may not have somebody to help pick it up or save it or change the way they look at it. And I know a lot of companies have just quit doing or trying something else, and it's just a rehash all over again. So we had an advantage of a consistency of leadership, at least in part of the company for that time period. Yes?
Just one more question. Upon reflection, right? Because I think most companies are not as fortunate as you, where number one, you had a leader come in at the right time. Number two, you had Toyota come in at the right time. Upon reflection of what the company went through, what do you recommend to this audience in terms of how do you initiate some of that, these folks here, as opposed to waiting for that perfect?
And I think it's very much the idea of, I could have said, well, you have to wait for the moment. But there are moments like that occurring all the time, whether we recognize them or not. The difference was in this case is that we also just happened to be prepared. And that's my point of, like, if we hadn't already actually had the Six Sigma program and all these leaders trained, even when we had gotten the business with Toyota, we probably would have struggled. At least at first, because there wouldn't have been a lot of operations leadership in the company that knew the techniques, and Toyota would have had to teach us stuff from scratch. As it was, I can remember sitting in training with Jamie, and the whole week of time out on the shop floor and everything else, never mentioned Kanban, never mentioned value stream maps, never mentioned, I don't even think technically he even used the word Kaizen. A whole week was about way other basic stuff in terms of, hey, you guys need to understand the basics of process design, right? And how to design processes to surface problems. You need to understand how to solve problems at a basic level and how to teach other people how to solve problems. It was that focus entirely, which allowed us, I think, kind of to come in it that way. So a lot of companies, though, have that at this point. It's just a matter of, like I said, kind of a slow game or the long game. You grab what you can, when and where you can. You change what minds, when and where you can. And eventually to try and get to the idea of having enough of a critical mass that the company changes along with them. It would be great to have an awesome, big, huge, strong leader, right, come in and change the gamut. But that, does or doesn't happen. So.
Very good. Thank you, Nick. Let's
Yep.
give him a hand. Well done.